Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into something a little different, the Vietnam War. But not the battles themselves. We're going to be exploring its impact back here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's easy to think of wars as things that just happen over there somewhere else, but the Vietnam War is a powerful example of how a conflict can have these massive ripple effects back home.
I mean, it's crazy to think that a war thousands of miles away could shake things up here in America. You know, politics, society, even our wallets.
Absolutely.
So we've got this lecture essay thing aimed at IBEB history students. This is like a good place to start, ready to uncover how the Vietnam War rocked the U.S. to its core.
Definitely. Let's dive in. It all starts with the economic shockwaves. By 1967, get this, the U.S. was spending $2 billion per month on this war.
$2 billion a month. Whoa, that's like what the government today was spending that much on a single conflict. Can you imagine how that would hit us?
It's a mind-boggling figure, right? And that kind of spending had these huge consequences. Like, it fueled inflation. You know, that shrinkflation everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
Kind of like that, but like on a massive scale. Your money just doesn't go as far. And then, of course, it totally ballooned the national deficit, like racking up a giant credit card debt.
It's like that friend who's always borrowing money, you know,
Yeah.
but never wants to say how much they actually owe.
Exactly. And what's really tragic is the trade-off that happened because of this. President Johnson at the time was trying to build this thing called the Great Society. These were like ambitious programs to fight poverty, improve education, healthcare, all sorts of things.
Yeah, a war on poverty right here at home.
That's a great way to put it. But these programs, they were being totally starved for funding because of the war.
So all those billions going to bombs and weapons when they could have been used to, I don't know, help build a better future here.
It's heartbreaking to think about, right? And all that economic hardship wasn't just, some abstract thing. People felt it in their wallets, in their everyday lives.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's where you see that link between the cost of the war and this rising anti-war sentiment back home.
Makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
When you're struggling just to, like, make ends meet, and you see the government spending billions on a war, who knows where, you're going to start asking some questions.
For sure. And those questions weren't just coming from, folks who were struggling financially. This war, it sparked a political awakening, especially among young people.
College campuses were like hotbeds for protest. This wasn't just their parents' generation. This was a whole new generation, like finding its voice.
Absolutely. And demanding change.
So what was it about this war that got people so fired up?
Well, you got to think about the draft, right? It disproportionately impacted working-class families and minorities. Like, if you had a college deferment, you had a way out. But if you didn't, you could get sent to fight in a war you didn't even believe in. It was this inherent unfairness that created, like, a huge amount of resentment. And it fueled the anti-war movement. You had organizations like Students for a Democratic Society, the SDS, mobilizing all these young people, and even Vietnam veterans themselves were speaking out against the war.
So we've got economic hardship, a growing anti-war movement, a generation of young people questioning authority. Things are heating up.
Yeah. And then just when you thought it couldn't get any more intense, 1968 happened.
1968. The year that broke America, right? What happened?
The Tet Offensive. It was a major, major turning point.
Okay, tell me about that.
So the Tet Offensive, right, it was this series of surprise attacks by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. And it was a setback for them, militarily speaking.
Okay.
But it really changed how Americans viewed the whole war.
So it wasn't about who, like, won or lost those battles. It was more the psychological effect.
Yeah. See, before Tet, the U.S. government was telling everyone, we're winning. The end is in sight. But then these attacks happen all across South Vietnam, and people are like, wait, what's really going on here?
It's like that whole credibility gap thing we were talking about, like finding out your friend has been hiding a huge debt while telling everyone they're, doing great financially.
That's a great way to put it. The Tet Offensive, it basically shattered the narrative, the one the government had been, feeding everyone, and people started to lose trust.
And what about President Johnson? How did this all hit him?
Oh, he was under immense pressure. You had the anti-war movement gaining all this momentum. Even people in his own administration started questioning things.
Wow.
And it got to the point where he decided not to run for re-election.
To, like, give up the presidency because of a war that's this unpopular. That's wild. It really shows how much this was dividing the country.
It was a huge moment. And then, just when you thought things couldn't get any more chaotic, 1968, assassinations, riots, protests, it was a crazy year.
1968. Yeah, like the year that broke America, right? Was the Vietnam War at the heart of all that.
It was a major factor, for sure. Like, take the Democratic National Convention. In Chicago, you had these massive clashes, right? Anti-war protesters, the police, it was a mess.
Inside the convention, too.
Yeah. The Democratic Party, they were tearing themselves apart over the war. Total chaos.
Man, that's intense. It sounds like the country was at a real turning point. What happened next?
Well, in the middle of all that turmoil, you have Richard Nixon. He emerges as a candidate.
Nixon.
Super shrewd politician. And he sensed that that people were craving stability.
After all the protests and unrest, yeah. They just wanted things to calm down.
Exactly. He appealed to what he called the silent majority. Those everyday Americans, tired of the war, tired of the protests.
Did he promise to end the war?
He did, and that message really resonated with a lot of voters. He also talked about restoring law and order, which appealed to people who felt like, things were out of control. Nixon ends up winning the election, but the debate about Vietnam and its impact, that didn't end there.
So even with a new president, a promise to end the war, the conversation kept going.
Oh, yeah. Historians, they have all sorts of different ways of looking at the war's impact.
Different perspectives.
Like some historians, those who take the New Left perspective, they argue that the war was a symptom of American imperialism, this need to control other countries. They'll point to the fact that the U.S. government often ignored what the Vietnamese people actually wanted. They were more focused on stopping the spread of communism.
That's a pretty critical take.
It is. But there are other perspectives, too. Some historians argue that the media was really critical of the war and that, that swayed public opinion against it.
Yeah.
They think that the media coverage, it made it much harder for the U.S. to actually achieve its goals in Vietnam.
So different historians, different interpretations. Seems like Vietnam is still a topic of debate even today.
Absolutely. It was a huge turning point, a watershed moment. And its legacy is complex, multifaceted. It spurred all these important conversations about the role of government, limits of power, the importance of, listening to different voices.
Conversations we're still having today, I guess.
Right. Vietnam wasn't just a war that happened overseas. It was this catalyst for change within America itself.
Wow.
It challenged assumptions, it sparked debates, and it left behind a legacy that we're still grappling with.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about that a war that ended so long ago could still have so much to teach us about ourselves, about the world. It shows how important it is to understand history, not just the dates and stuff,
right,
but as a way to understand the present and even, shape the future.
Well said. Studying the past, we can hopefully learn from our mistakes, right? Recognize patterns and make better, more informed decisions.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Vietnam War, I'm curious, what's the biggest takeaway for you? What really stuck with you from this conversation?
That credibility gap thing we were talking about, that really gets to me. It did some real damage to how the government and people relate to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, when the government isn't, straight with you, when people feel like they're being lied to, it erodes trust. Makes it way harder to actually deal with important stuff.
It makes you think, are we still dealing with that today?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. We're like bombarded with info from all sides now. How do we even know what to believe?
Right.
And how do we hold our leaders accountable? It's a question we're still trying to figure out all these years later.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the government being honest, right? The Vietnam War, it also sparked this wave of activism, social and political, especially among young people.
Yeah.
It forced America to confront some really tough truths about race, class, the abuse of power.
And those conversations, those movements for change, they didn't just go away when the war ended.
Not at all. They kept shaping things, the political landscape. They inspired activism for generations.
It's almost like the Vietnam War wasn't just this, conflict that happened way over there. It was, like you said, a catalyst. It changed America itself.
I think so. It challenged what people thought they knew. It started arguments and debates. And yeah, like we were saying, it left this legacy behind, one that we're still trying to figure out.
It's incredible how a war that ended so long ago can still have so much to teach us. about,
Should.
ourselves, about the world, it really drives home the point that history matters.
For sure.
It's not just, memorizing dates and names.
No.
It's about understanding who we are, where we come from.
So to everyone listening, as you go about your day, think about, the Vietnam War and all its ripple effects. What happened back then in the late 60s? How did that shape the world we live in now? Do we still see those echoes today? Something to think about. And until next time, keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.